everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. I want you to think about your day-to-day operations for a second, right? Like when things inevitably go wrong, or your team hits a total wall with a project. Do you change your software, or do you change your workflow? If you manage people, or if you're deep into studying management, you know this is a constant, almost daily friction point. Well, today, we're breaking down a really fascinating piece of research by Paul M. Leonardi that looks exactly at this dynamic. So let's dive right into this by challenging a super common management assumption. A lot of times, we kind of just think of technology as this fixed tool, like a rigid box that humans simply have to adapt themselves to. But in modern workplaces, it's way more fluid. We're dealing with flexible routines and flexible technologies. As managers, understanding how your team actually decides between changing their daily habits or changing their digital tools is absolutely critical for driving efficiency and, honestly, just driving innovation. Here is a quick look at our roadmap for today. We'll be covering 1. Human and material agencies, 2. The architecture of imbrication, 3. Making culture durable, 4. Affordances versus constraints, and finally, 5. The newsletter example. Basically, we're going to break down these pretty dense organizational concepts into a highly practical lens for managing team dynamics. All right, part 1, human and material agencies. Let's start by just defining the fundamental building blocks of both our workplace routines and our technologies. Notice this stark contrast between our two main players here. On one side, we have human agency. This is about us, right? Our intentions, our goals, our ability to reflect on what we're doing. We take action because we want a specific outcome. But on the other side, we have material agency. Now, this is the capacity for non-human entities, like your team's software, to just act on their own, totally apart from human intervention. Think about how a program compiles code overnight or generates a 3D model automatically. It has its own performativity. It literally does things. Moving on to part 2, the architecture of imbrication. Let's see how this builds into the absolute core metaphor of Leonardi's research. Okay, the word here is imbrication. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it actually comes from ancient Roman and Greek architecture. To build a waterproof roof back then, they used two completely distinct types of interlocking clay tiles, the flat tegula and the curved imbrex. By themselves, neither tile can protect a house from the rain. But when they're arranged in an overlapping, interdependent pattern, they create this incredibly solid, functional structure. Human and material agencies are exactly like those tiles. They are distinct things, for sure, but they interlock to create the very structures of our organizations. So the crucial point here is that when we look really closely at our workplace, the routines we follow and the technologies we use are essentially indistinguishable at their core. Seriously, they're both just infrastructures born from this exact interlocking process. If you were to put a routine or a piece of software under a microscope, you'd find the exact same building blocks. Human goals completely interweaved with material capabilities. Part 3, making culture durable. Because once these tiles are laid down, we really need to understand how they harden over time to shape your actual workplace culture. When human and material agencies interlock successfully so your team can actually get their work done, those structures become sort of transparent. They stabilize. Over time, we literally stop questioning why we use a certain software program or why we follow some specific approval routine. The research calls this black boxing. They become ready-to-hand tools that we just take for granted. And this is so vital to understand. This materiality is absolutely crucial for making your organizational culture durable. It is the invisible glue holding the whole way you work together. But here is the really good news. While your team's past technology choices heavily influence your future workflows, they do not deterministically lock you in. They just accumulate over time. Think of that roofer laying those clay tiles. The placement of the previous tiles definitely influences where the next one can go, but you still have choices. You aren't trapped by your legacy systems. You're just working within the framework they established. Which brings us to part 4, affordances versus constraints. Because if we aren't totally locked in, how do we actually decide whether to change our team's routine or change the technology itself? To answer that, we have to look at affordances. And this isn't just about what buttons are physically built into a screen. Affordances are completely relational. They exist in that invisible space between what your team wants to do and what the software's materiality actually allows. A piece of software might have a super advanced feature, but if your team doesn't perceive it as useful for their very specific goal, well, then it's simply not an affordance for them. This right here is the pivot.
It's the exact moment of decision. When people perceive that a technology severely constrains their ability to achieve a goal, let's say the software just flat out won't let them generate a specific report, they'll try to change the technology. They'll customize it, they'll write a workaround script, or maybe they'll beg IT for a new feature. But when they perceive that a technology affords new possibilities, they'll actually change their human routines to take advantage of it. It's a fundamental rule. Constraint changes tech, affordance changes routine.
All right, part 5, the newsletter example. Let's ground all of this heavy theory into a highly relatable, super practical case study straight from Leonardi's text.
Imagine a team at a community organization. Initially, their main goal is just to disseminate news to their members, so they use a very basic word processor to type up text summaries. That's a routine, right? But then they form a totally new goal. They want to make this a visually appealing newsletter with cool graphics. Suddenly they realize their basic word processor severely constrains this new goal. It just literally cannot handle complex image formatting. So what happens? To overcome this massive constraint, the team actually modifies the technology itself. They go in and add a new feature or plugin for digitized drawings. What we're seeing here is the literal transformation of the software. The material agency of the basic word processor overlaps with their human goal to disseminate news, and a whole new material capability is born right there in the middle. The technology itself has been fundamentally transformed by the users. And now watch what happens next. Because they changed the software and it now has these drawing capabilities, the team perceives brand new affordances. They realize, hey, with these catchy graphics, we could reach a way wider audience. This inspires an entirely new human goal. And to achieve this new goal, they actually have to change their daily routines. One person specializes in writing copy, another specializes in drawing, and they coordinate in a completely different way. The new material agency afforded a massive change in their human routines. What you should really take away from this as a manager is that continuous looping push and pull between human goals and material reality. Routines and technologies, they aren't separate worlds. They share the exact same building blocks. Your employees are constantly transforming both their own practices and the technology itself, all based on whether they feel constrained or afforded new opportunities. And remember, all of this builds on itself. The infrastructure they create today directly shapes what they'll perceive as possible tomorrow. I want to end on this somewhat provocative thought. When you watch your team struggle with a workflow, stop just asking, how do we fix the software or how do we retrain the team? Look at the imbrication. Are you letting past black-boxed infrastructure blindly dictate your team's routines? Or are you actively watching for those moments of constraint and affordance to deliberately shape your next organizational structure? Understanding this delicate balance? Well, that's the true architecture of organizing. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep looking closely at how your team interacts with their tools.